From NBCSports.com, 2017. Quote, Field of Dreams is absolutely terrible. End quote. From USA Today, 2019. Quote, In retrospect, Field of Dreams is a terrible film. End quote. From Sports Illustrated, 2018. Quote, Don't kid yourself. Field of Dreams is a bad movie. End quote. I find this article interesting because it's written by a former Major League player, Jerry Blevins. And Jerry Blevins follows my Midnight Library of Baseball Instagram account, and I follow his. So I'm looking forward to talking with him about our different experiences about baseball and about this film. But my favorite anti-Field of Dreams article title, and in my opinion, the wittiest of them all, quote, Field of Dreams is stupid, and you're stupid for liking it, end quote. Some of you listening may not be familiar or intimately familiar with Field of Dreams. And based on my previous episodes for Season 2, you may think everyone in the world loved this film. But over the course of the last 35 years, Field of Dreams has received its fair share of dislike, distaste, displeasure, and in some cases, utter loathing. And some of these criticisms aren't without merit. Tonight, as we follow the progress of Field of Dreams from the end of filming to release, we'll discuss some of the final big changes, and also we'll look at how the film was received across the board and across the globe.
This book really should have never been written. The film should have never been made.
I sort of have this feeling that one of the reasons I was born, was to be part of this, to get this out into the culture.
What they didn't count on was the word of mouth, that people would see it and then just say, oh my God, you have to go see this movie. It ended up defying the odds.
Midnight Library of Baseball presents Season 2, The Making of Field of Dreams. And as always, no loud music or jarring sounds. I'm Ben Orlando. Most of us can think of a film where one single word, stands out above the rest. One single word resonates or holds the other pieces together. Tom Hanks shouting Wilson in Castaway. Inconceivable from Princess Bride. Adrian from Rocky. For Field of Dreams, this one word was not even supposed to be there. And it comes in the last few minutes. The word is dad, as in, hey, Dad, you want to have a catch? I'm staring right now at the actual script, in the last pages, at the scene between Ray Kinsella and his father John. The script reads as follows. Ray. Hey. John turns back. Ray is holding a ball. Ray. You want to have a catch? John closes his eyes for a second, and when he opens them, there's a hint of moisture. Does he know Ray is his son? John, I'd like that. That's the original dialogue and description. Notice the omission of Dad. Writer and director Phil Alden Robinson wanted this final scene to be subtle, and he didn't ever want Ray to say the word Dad. He wanted this truth to come through in their subtext, in their glances and body language. Something you couldn't pull off in a play, but something you absolutely could achieve with film and close-up shots. Even so, during the screenings of the film, test audiences hated the subtlety. They want it concrete. They wanted to know definitively that John Kinsella knew that Ray knew he was his father. So they brought Kevin Costner back into the editing room to add this one word, Dad. Hey, wanna have a catch becomes, hey, Dad, wanna have a catch? It's a tiny change, and yet this tiny change tested through the roof with audiences. I understand Phil Alden Robinson's wish to convey everything necessary through subtext and looks and body language. But the power of words is undeniable. And here, in this final scene, it's like the key has been inserted into the lock and turned. The doorknob has twisted, but the door is not quite open. It's snagged. But with this one word, Dad, the door springs ajar. And for many, the emotional baggage of years pours out like clothes from a crammed closet. In this same scene, there was another snag over the phrase, have a catch. Kevin Costner didn't like it. Most people familiar with baseball never heard it before. You say, play catch. But to Phil Alden Robinson from New York, this is what people said. And it took Kevin Costner a while to wrap his mouth around the odd phrasing. Of all the late changes, one alteration had a significant impact on viewers and the people involved. I'm talking here about the title of the film. For most of the project, the film was known as Shoeless Joe. It was pitched as Shoeless Joe, based on W.P. Kinsella's novel, Shoeless Joe. And Phil Alden Robinson, who loved the novel, also loved the title and wanted to keep it. But the studio had different ideas. They thought that when people saw this title, Shoeless Joe, they would think it was about a homeless person. From editor Lawrence Kesenick, who talked W.P. Kinsella into turning the short story into a novel, and who was intimately familiar with the book.
The funny story is that Phil, when he finally got a studio to take it, and they would have called it Field of Dreams, he absolutely hated the name. He hated it, and he was really nervous about telling, because they were insisting on it. He didn't really have control over it, so he was going to have to tell Bill. So he calls up Kinsella, and Kinsella says, and this is true, he said, "Well, the original title of the book was Dreamfields. So I'm fine with that name." And Phil was just shocked. And I thought Dreamfields was a horrible name myself. That's why it got changed. But the studio said, Shoeless Joe, it sounds like it's about a homeless guy.
Yeah.
It's a good point, but I know who Shoeless Joe Jackson was, so it didn't have that kind of resonance for me when I read it, when we came up with the idea. But it is fun. I mean, that is such a bizarre coincidence that they got that close to what his first title was.
Actor Timothy Busfield also recalled his reaction when a furious Phil Alden Robinson called him to vent.
Phil Robinson called me and said they want to change the title of the movie. He was so mad. He was looking for me he was looking for me to tell him. And I did. They said, what do they want to change it to? And he said, Field of Dreams. And I said, oh, that's so stupid. What a horrible title. He was right. Isn't it horrible? They're going to ruin everything. Oh, that's disgusting. I was like, I was just saying whatever he wanted to hear. I didn't care. I was just, it didn't mean that. I wasn't like I thought Shoeless Joe was the best name ever, but I was so wanting to make Phil feel better that I agreed with him totally on it. And then Phil just gets a huge chuckle out of that now.
Yeah.
I'm sure he still wished it would have worked as Shoeless Joe because he bought us all wrap presents with Shoeless Joe on them. But
oh man,
I think he's okay now with Field of Dreams.
Yeah.
Phil Alden Robinson said that people who first read the book liked the book better than the film. And people who saw the film before reading the book liked the film better. This is the thing with life. You can never unknow. I can never really imagine the film as Shoeless Joe and what that would have meant, because it didn't happen. I can see the benefit of this title, Field of Dreams, as there was actually a field that people would come to. I also love that W.P. Kinsella's original title was Dreamfields, and that editor Lawrence Kesenick hated it and urged Kinsella to change it. Phil Alden Robinson hated it and adamantly tried to hold on to Shoeless Joe. It was like some invisible force kept pushing the title back to the surface over and over, as if fated. But this movie, with a new ending, with a musical score, and a new title, would now be released to the world. But with this achievement, there was also a loss for writer-director Phil Alden Robinson. During our conversation, Robinson touched on this loss, and it's probably my favorite part of our interview.
So, what is your take on this film at this point in terms of, the contribution to not only entertainment but to the world, would you say?
I don't know. I mean, I feel like in some ways I'm the last person on earth who would know that, because there's this amazing and frustrating relation between a filmmaker and his film. I've never seen this film the way it's meant to be seen. I've never seen it the way an audience sees it, which is not knowing what happens. I have seen it only as a collection of these things that I worked on and worked on and worked on and worked on and saw 1,000 times before it was put together. And so I'm amazed at that people have taken it to heart. I envy them. Whenever I hear somebody talk about how it moved them, I envy them so much. I would love to erase my memory and see this film just once the way an audience sees it. And I remember in the year or two after it came out, there were a few films that made me cry, and that I think it was partly because I was so hungry for that experience, to know what people are feeling when they see this movie. And somebody told me that late in his life that there was a novelist who was suffering from Alzheimer's, and he got to read his novels. Before he had lost his faculties, he got to read his novels without knowing anything about them. And I always thought, that's kind of a beautiful thing in a way. You think how horrible this disease is. That's pretty beautiful in a way.
It is for you in terms of making it, because you put so much into it that you'll never forget. Yeah. Is that how you feel?
I've seen it 1,000 times. I've seen every scene 1,000 times. And so for a long time, when I watched the film, I would remember what side of the camera I was standing on for that shot, and I would remember what was happening. I'm less so now. I can usually watch things I've done and not be constantly thinking about what happened when we shot that scene.
For me, this insight from Phil Alden Robinson stands out because it's true. Of course it's true. But most people don't think about it. Most creators don't even think about it. I've written so many stories, so many novels, screenplays, podcasts, and I never thought, I wonder what it's like to experience this as a new reader, as a new audience. I mean, sometimes this happens when I read something I wrote years ago. It's like I'm reading something from a stranger, but it's still not the same. And it's also different for someone like Phil Alden Robinson, who was so absolutely involved with every step of Field of Dreams. The minutiae, the edits, the retakes, the reshoots, the piece-by-piece watches and rewatches. They were forever embedded in his brain, to the degree that he can never see this with fresh eyes. I think it's nice to take a moment now and consider your favorite film, your favorite book. For the creator of this work, whatever it is, there was probably a great deal of struggle of hard work and long hours. But also, there's this sacrifice of never being able to take in the work as you took it in, never being able to see it with fresh eyes, and a complete lack of knowing what was going to happen next. In the previous episode, I mentioned that composer James Horner was the first outsider to see the fully cut and edited version of Field of Dreams. But after the last changes in music were added, one of the biggest names in the business got an early look at the film, and he was not disappointed. From actor Dwyer Brown.
While they were doing the final edits and putting the music in, Steven Spielberg watched the movie because he'd heard scuttlebutt about it.
When Phil Alden Robinson heard that Spielberg was itching to see the film, he sent a copy to the director's home.
And Spielberg just loved it. And you can imagine why Spielberg would have loved it.
As writer Anthony Breznican explained in a Vanity Fair piece, the father-son dynamic was an important running theme in Spielberg's early films. By 1989, Steven Spielberg had produced or directed Back to the Future, Goonies, E.T., The Color Purple, and Indiana Jones, to name a few. His thumbs up would have gone a long way to making everyone involved more comfortable with what was about to happen. And what was about to happen? Well, it wasn't going to be a normal release. From Phil Alden Robinson.
The studio's support of the film when we're done with it was phenomenal. They planned what's called a platform release, which is you open it in just a few theaters in big cities, the purpose of which is to get, you hope, great reviews in the New York Times, the Washington Post, the LA Times, Time Magazine, the Today Show. It's a very expensive way to open a movie because you're spending all this money on big advertising and you're only in 20 or 30 theaters. And in this case, it worked because we got great reviews, great word of mouth, and every week they just completely upped the number of theaters we were in till we were in 4 weeks, we were in 1,000 theaters. So it was I think they perfectly handled it, and they were so deeply supportive of the film that I will always be grateful to that. And I always give props to Tom Pollock and everybody at Universal because they could so easily have just sort of dropped this as a little film and make a little splash, but they really thought this is a big hit if we handle it right. And I thought they handled it perfectly.
The issue I brought up before about a creator never being able to see a creation with fresh eyes might seem to some like a good problem to have. Well, Dwyer Brown faced another one of these good problems to have in the space between filming and release. On the good side, an actor with only 6 minutes of screen time got his name in the opening credits. Production manager Brian Frankish tells the story.
Frank Whaley, I think his name was.
Frank Whaley was young Doc Graham.
Right.
Archie Graham. Yeah.
That's what I'm thinking of.
Yeah.
Well, when we ran the first roll of the credits, I had missed in creating those credits that he had a mainstream, a main title credit.
How do you determine whether somebody gets a main title credit?
Well, it's in their contract.
Oh, okay.
It's what's negotiated with the casting director in front. And Phil had forgotten it also. And his agent brought it to our attention, and our casting director. And that's when Phil said, well, if I have to give Frank Whaley a credit, I want to give Dad a credit. So that's how Dwyer Brown got a main title credit. Because Frank Whaley missed it on the first run.
Wow.
So Dwyer Brown, who'd been waiting for his big break, now had his name at the front of a top-tier film. For actors in Hollywood, it wasn't the first big film that made your career. It was how you used that first film to build your career. And now Brown realized he could not do anything. He was stuck. From Dwyer Brown.
I mean, it was a brilliant thing for Phil to do and certainly helped me. But in any case, I realized that if I went on a PR tour, you know, as you try to do as an actor, if you get in a movie that's a role that's noticeable in a movie, you try to parlay that into, you know, the next movie by, you know, calling attention to it. But I realized that in order to do the PR, they'd say, well, what role did you play? And I'd say, oh, I played Kevin Costner's father. And they'd be like, well, how did that happen? He's 4 years older than you. And then I'd be like, yeah, well, I come back at the end of the movie as a young man. I would have ruined the movie for a lot of people, you know. And I just figured that it wasn't worth that, you know, for the, you know, whatever PR I would have gotten out of it personally.
Even though he wasn't able to parlay the role in the way that he would have liked, Dwyer Brown derived deep fulfillment from a different experience associated with the film. But before we get to Dwyer Brown's story, let's return to the reception of Field of Dreams after its release. And we'll hear that story after a short break. If you like the show and crave more content, you can become a Patreon member, where you'll have access to additional audio episodes, video interviews, and other articles and images linked to the show. Go to Patreon/Midnight Library of Baseball. And since this is a one-man production, every bit of support helps. You can donate at midnightlibraryofbaseball.com, and you can add reviews on iTunes and Spotify. Okay, back to the show. As I stated earlier, the reviews of Field of Dreams were not all sunshine and rainbows. We've already talked about Ray Liotta, who played a well-spoken right-handed hitter with a New Jersey accent, portraying Shoeless Joe Jackson, who was an illiterate left-handed batter from the Deep South. Some audience members had major issues with these discrepancies, but as casting director Marjorie Simpkin explained, it was most important to find an actor with presence, and that's what she saw in Ray Liotta. For another criticism, some people thought the father-son backstory was too thinly written and reliant on the audience transferring their own experiences onto the characters instead of actually connecting with the characters on the screen. But millions of people watching this film had a deep emotional connection. For me, the one part of the movie that irked me came toward the end, and it's when the father, John, asks Ray, "Is this heaven?" And Ray says, "It's Iowa." John says, "Iowa? Huh, I could have sworn this was heaven." But then Ray says to him, "Is there a heaven?" And John says, "Oh yeah, heaven's where dreams come true." Well, if you know there's a heaven, why did you ask if this was heaven? I guess so that was a little confusing to me. It didn't make sense. Another argument is that only white players came out of the cornfields. This is true. During the time of Shoeless Joe Jackson, baseball was segregated, but major league players played with black players and Hispanic players, even female players, during barnstorming leagues. And I actually brought up this argument with W.P. Kinsella biographer Willie Steele.
When I read the first article, I think it's from LA Times about it, and it was just, it was pretty harsh on the issues of baseball, kind of glamorizing baseball, considering the history of baseball and segregation and all that happens in Field of Dreams, painting this picture that's not true and people need to forget about it. How do you respond to that?
Baseball is not a perfect game. It has a flawed history. Baseball at time, for years would not let black players play, which is there's no excuse for that. right? And you can say, well, they were a product of the times. Well, they were wrong. To me, Jackie Robinson should come out of the corn, right? Satchel
Right.
Paige should come out of the corn. But they don't.
Yeah.
And every year, there's a writer who every year writes at least one article about how he hates Field of Dreams. It's cheesy, it's overrated, it's this, it's that. And all my friends always feel the need to forward that to me. And I wrote a piece, I don't know, a year or two ago for a journal where I said, people can stop doing that. And I don't I'm not angry at the author for saying that. I like black licorice. I really do. And so every Easter, I get a thing of black licorice jelly beans. Nobody else in my family likes them. That's okay. They don't have to like them. They don't have to even try them. But I do. And so if you don't like Field of Dreams, don't watch it. Like, not everything has to be a hot take.
Of all the criticisms I came across in my research, one stuck in my mind because I thought, is this true? The writer of this article couldn't believe that Ray Kinsella would have struggled so much with the decision of plowing under just a few small patches of corn. After all, for a farmer with a huge field of corn, what difference could a small plot like this make? To this critic, it seemed unrealistic to make such a big deal out of this. Well, when I was talking with Wendell Jarvis from the Iowa Film Office, he told me a story that tripped a wire in my brain over this very question. And to add some context, remember, the baseball field that they built for Field of Dreams was in real life on two different properties, Don Lansing's property and the property of Al Amescamp. Here's Wendell Jarvis.
We had finished filming the movie. It hadn't been released yet, and it was in the spring. And Al Amescamp, one of the other property owners, called me up. It was a Sunday morning. And he called me and he said, Wendell, I don't know what to do. This ball field is taking up cropland, and I'm losing money by having this here. Should I plow it under? And I said, you've got to make that decision on your own. But if it were me, I would absolutely not plow it under. And then he called me back that night. He told me he sat out on his tractor for 4 hours staring at the ball field and then plowed it under and destroyed that section of the ball field. And then people started to come. And people, just like in the movie, people will come, and they started to come to visit that. And Al spent the money to pay to get it rebuilt. And I helped him with that, finding the vendors, to find the gravel that they needed for the track area and things like that. So he regretted doing that, but now nobody can tell, and I don't think most people even know that happened.
The problem is, you can't do all the things in the span of 107 minutes. You can't check all the boxes. You just can't. But you can plant a lot of seeds. You can stretch the mind and the heart. With a good, interesting, out-of-the-box story, you can trick people into pausing their rapid-fire lives just long enough to say, hey, wait, what am I doing? Wait, who am I? Wait, I have feelings? Why don't I feel like this more of the time? Why does this take a piece of fiction to make me feel real feelings in real life? Field of Dreams is not perfect, but it sure as hell is different. And that in itself is a breath of fresh air in a world of derivatives and sequels. But at the end of the film, in those dark theaters in 1989, when the credits rolled and thousands upon thousands of men and women sat in their seats bawling their eyes out, they were asking themselves these deep questions, whether they were aware of it or not. And if you read Dwyer Brown's book, if you listen to some of the stories at the end of these episodes, if you read comments in my Instagram feed, you can see the many lives actually changed for the better because of Field of Dreams. Not bad for an absolutely terrible film. Much of the response to Field of Dreams was positive. It received 3 Academy Award nominations for Best Picture, Best Adapted Screenplay, and Best Original Musical Score. But for Dwyer Brown, there was one type of response that meant more than any award or critical review. 2 weeks after Field of Dreams was released, Dwyer Brown got a call from Phil Alden Robinson, inviting him to see the movie with Robinson and producer Chuck Gordon. But Brown had a prior obligation. Even so, he asked Robinson, "Haven't you seen it enough times?" To which Robinson replied, "We don't watch the film, we watch the audience. We just show up for the last 5 minutes. You should try it." "What am I looking for?" Brown asked him. "You'll know. And don't forget to stay for the credits," Robinson told him. A few days later, when his schedule was clear, Dwyer Brown arrived at a movie theater and awkwardly asked to buy a ticket with 10 minutes left in the film. This is from his book, If You Build It, a book about Father's Fate and Field of Dreams. Quote, "As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I found a single empty seat on the aisle in the second to last row and quietly sat down. I was immediately drawn into the film by the audience around me. When Ray says, 'It's my father,' there was an audible gasp in the theater, and the tall man next to me put his hand over his mouth. I watched the rest of the film with tears in my eyes, watching the audience watch the film. The silence in the large room was uncanny. It felt as if everyone in the entire auditorium was holding their breath. You want to have a catch?" The tall man next to me sank down in his chair and put his hands over his face. "I'd like that." Muted sobbing broke out in small groups all around me. The tall man watched Ray and John play catch through his fingers. The movie screen reflected in the tears in his cheeks. I watched as the credits began to roll and the first few members of the audience got up to leave. Many had clearly been crying, and I wanted to be invisible. It felt wrong to be there, like I had wandered into a stranger's funeral. I hunched down in my seat. The tall man was leaning away from me onto his wife, and she was comforting him earnestly. I couldn't stop watching his heaving shoulders out of the corner of my eye and strained to hear what they were whispering to each other. I felt like a strange voyeur of grief. I was desperate not to be recognized, for fear it would break the spell. But I wanted also to comfort them. I knew what it felt like to lose a father. I felt both proud and humbled to be there. As I stood up, I put my hand over my face, but watched them leave, sniffling and holding each other as the credits rolled on. There were a lot of people still in their seats. Many of these groups were men, large athletic men, who I imagined had come with their buddies to watch a movie about baseball. Now they were crying and couldn't stop. I watched one group of 5 men in UCLA jerseys that never said a word to each other, just crying in their own separate grief, getting comfort only from the darkness and the fact that they weren't weeping alone. Another group of 4 slightly older men were seated with their arms on each other's shoulders, as if they were in a huddle at a touch football game. They were crying and occasionally thumping each other's backs. A young man was turned sideways in his seat and hugged an older man next to him, weeping uncontrollably. I imagined they were father and son. I had a pang of long regretting that I would never have the opportunity to watch this movie with my dad. When the final credit finally faded from the screen and the music ended, there were still several of these groups left in their seats. Only when the house lights slowly came up to reveal them were these men able to pull themselves together and make their way slowly toward the exits. As the young men and the usher crew avoided eye contact and worked through the aisles to clean up the mess, I walked out through the lobby into the cool spring night. I've never had another experience like it. End quote. In his darker days, as he saw his acting career failing, or at least not living up to his hopes, a young Dwyer Brown made a promise to God. If God put him in just one meaningful film, Brown would use that opportunity to help people. And Dwyer Brown was true to his word. For the last 35 years, Brown has appeared at fundraisers, charities, festivals, many special occasions, dressed as John Kinsella. He's appeared at hundreds of baseball games, brought smiles to millions of faces, young and old. But of all the ways he's used his role to help people, perhaps the most impacting is also the simplest. Dwyer Brown has stood in front of dozens upon dozens of strangers who recognized him at the store, on the street, and he's listened to their stories. Stories of how this movie helped them talk to their fathers, or their sons, daughters, or mothers. How they finally had a mechanism to ask the dreaded question or reveal the terrible secret, and in the process lifted 1,000-pound weights off their shoulders. And throughout these long, heartfelt conversations, Dwyer Brown listened. He saw them in these honest moments of vulnerability. This phenomenon happened with all cast and crew involved with the making of Field of Dreams, because simply mentioning that you starred in or worked on the film, even 30 years later, could open a Pandora's box of nostalgia, history, and emotion. And this story, this dynamic, this opening up, is one of the lasting impacts of Field of Dreams. For Phil Alden Robinson, one experience stands out in his mind as the most memorable and meaningful response to the film from any audience member.
Well, just a couple of years ago, we took it to Vietnam. I was with a group from the Academy. We went to Vietnam, and we showed it in Hanoi one night. And it was the worst possible way to screen this film. They didn't have subtitles. They didn't have a dubbed version. They had a man in the projection booth with a microphone reading the script out loud as the film. It was awful. It was like one voice doing all this. And I can only imagine how confusing it must have been when the voice speaks, and it's just a guy saying, "If you build it, he will come," in Vietnamese, and it's like people thinking, what the hell is that? So I didn't have high hopes that it would move people. And when the lights came up, I did a Q&A, and there was this, and people were very nice, and the last question was from an elderly lady in the audience. And when you go to Vietnam and you see people of a certain age, you think, yeah, they were here when we were bombing them. It's like that. And you wonder what they think of us. And she asked a long question in Vietnamese, and I had to wait for the translation. And the translation was, "Until I saw this film, I never knew that American people care for their families the way Vietnamese people do. This has changed my whole image of America." And I still get choked up thinking about that. It's like, wow, a movie did that.
In episode 13, people do come to the field in Dyersville, millions of people. And although the camera stopped rolling, the magic remained.
So I was shooting during this day, and I had a crew, and I had the people, and I had all the stuff, and everyone there, and all the equipment on a farm in Monticello, Iowa. It's only 30 minutes away from Dyersville, Field of Dreams. And it was lunch time, and they all had lunch brought in, and I said, I gotta go run and do something. It might be just a little bit. And of course, I'm the director, I could do that. But we beelined straight for the Field of Dreams. Not telling anyone, we were obviously playing hooky from the shoot. So we played catch a little bit, and we ran around. And then I saw this old timer walk up, this old man, and he was hobbling. And I started up a conversation with him, and this guy was in his 80s. If I would have seen that old man walking down the street, I would have said, there's no way he could have picked up a bat. As I was throwing to him, he became a younger man.
Next time on the Midnight Library of Baseball presents The Making of Field of Dreams. The show is produced and edited by me, Ben Orlando. Music by Sergei Papkin and Ashot Danielyan. Good night.